Today at 6, a snap election is called in Northern Ireland after months of political deadlock at Stormont, but no date is given. Devolved government hasn't functioned since an election in May. Today, the Northern Ireland Secretary said he would call a new poll.
We are where we are. I have limited options ahead of me. I'm under a legal duty to call an election within 12 weeks.
Doctors are among those saying that the lack of a functioning government in Northern Ireland is hampering their ability to plan.
What is happening now is that we are firefighting. We can't plan, we can't look ahead, we can't do anything different than firefight, and it is just getting worse and worse.
We'll bring you all the latest, also on the programme.
You have shown absolutely no remorse, and it appears that you are in complete denial.
A murder sentence is televised for the first time in England and Wales. Gemma Mitchell is given life for the killing and decapitation of her friend. The world's richest man, Elon Musk, takes control of the social media platform Twitter in a £38 billion deal. And the minting of new coins bearing the image of King Charles III in circulation from December.
And how hundreds of people in East London, left in the dark after losing power 3 days ago, have still not been able to return home.
Good evening. The Northern Ireland Secretary has said that voters in Northern Ireland will be going to the polls for the second time in 12 months to vote yet again for members of the Stormont Assembly. After a midnight deadline to break months of gridlock passed, Chris Heaton-Harris said an election must be held within 12 weeks, although he didn't give a date. In May, the Nationalist Party Sinn Féin for the first time won the biggest number of seats in the devolved parliament. But the largest unionist party, the DUP, refused to join the power-sharing executive, which means the government cannot function. The DUP believes that Northern Ireland's place in the UK is being undermined by the post-Brexit trade deal signed by Boris Johnson. That deal is known as the Protocol, and it sets out the trading arrangements between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Goods being transported to Northern Ireland from the mainland are subject to checks. Our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy reports.
Political paralysis on the horizon for some time, now set in. As the midnight deadline came and went, civil servants, not ministers anymore, are running Northern Ireland. Today, the Secretary of State said he would still call an election, but left doubt over a date, saying he wanted to talk more to the parties first.
I have limited options ahead of me. I'm under a legal duty to call an election within 12 weeks. I've had lots and lots of talks with all the parties and will continue to do so.
6 and 10 o'clock news, BBC. There was the option to legislate to delay this moment. How does calling an election help solve any of the problems for Northern Ireland that got us here?
Nearly all the parties who've been saying this won't help the situation actually signed up to the rules that make this situation happen. Why call it now? Because I'm legally bound to do so.
And those rules state it must be held within 12 weeks. Alongside carol singers, voters are now expecting campaigning politicians on their doorstep in the run-up to Christmas. But beyond that, no one really thinks there's any greater prospect of power sharing coming back. The DUP maintains they will only go back into government if major changes are made to the Brexit arrangements.
I'm ready to fight an election. If the Secretary of State wants to hold an election, then he should tell us and we'll prepare for that election. But if not, then let's focus on what really needs to be done, which is to find a solution that restores Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom and removes the protocol and the harm it's doing to our relationship with the rest of the UK.
What I'm concerned about is that we need an Assembly and Executive up and running. We need to have one functioning to serve the people well, to get them through these tough times. But what we're all left this evening wondering what's going to happen next and what actually is the motivation behind what the Secretary of State have done this evening.
Not having a government means the ability to help communities with immediate challenges is severely limited. For many families, that means facing the cost of living crisis with political leaders absent.
We are struggling from not even week to week, but day to day, trying to put food on our table.
James manages a community hub in Belfast. He says families are increasingly dependent on the voluntary services here and that he's in the same boat.
I used to run a food hub from my house over COVID, and there is times that I'm having to go to a food programme and say, listen, we're really struggling.
Yourself?
Ourselves. And as a manager, it's humiliating.
Another election, James believes, provides no new answers.
But I don't believe that the people here there really want Stormont to work.
And with patients facing the longest waiting lists in the UK, doctors are warning the health service is a major casualty of this crisis. What will this winter look like for healthcare workers if there's no functioning government?
Yeah, we already know that it's really, really difficult. Even with the government, we just cannot cope with the demand that's there at the moment. 6 months ago, we should have had an executive. We should have had a budget, not only a budget, but a multi-year budget, which would have allowed us to do things vastly differently. And we would have seen those changes now. There's lots and lots of plans that are there.
The polarised politics of power sharing means Stormont has only functioned for 2 of the last 6 years. For many people, today marks a return to problems that Northern Ireland has faced all too often before. Well, before today, the Secretary of State was crystal clear that he was going to call an election at 1 minute past midnight. But today, he didn't seem to be so bullish with the parties, leaving everyone a bit more doubtful about that time frame. Now, of course, the tensions between the parties hasn't been improved here, but the power to change the Northern Ireland Protocol doesn't lie at Stormont. That's dependent on negotiations between the British government and the EU. So the DUP will go into this election arguing they have support from voters for their position of staying out of government until their demands are met. So many people feel we could get to the other side of polling day, whenever that is, in exactly the same position with really no greater sense of what happens next.
Thank you very much. Our correspondent Emma Vardy reporting there. The social media platform Twitter is now in the hands of the world's richest man. Elon Musk has promised change at the organisation. A number of top executives have reportedly been fired, and there are now questions about Twitter's future direction. Its billionaire owner believes in what he calls absolute free speech. The completion of the deal, worth more than £38 billion, brings to an end months of legal wrangling. Our technology editor Zoe Kleinman reports.
Elon Musk. To his many fans, one of the most innovative and influential people in the world. He's certainly the richest. He made his money with PayPal, and he's now the boss of the electric car firm Tesla. He also owns rocket maker SpaceX, and his Starlink satellite network provides internet access around the world. And now he adds to his portfolio Twitter, the small but mighty social network. Let that sink in, he said, walking into Twitter HQ, carrying, yes, a sink. Elon Musk is a prolific tweeter with more than 110 million followers. He's now calling himself Chief Twit. The bird is freed, he tweeted, followed later by, let the good times roll. But what does the tech billionaire want to do with it? He's previously said he wants to see Twitter become more open to free speech.
If he starts to see that a certain type of free speech environment, e.g. one where anything goes, might become a hellscape, as he said, and that might see people leave, in which case advertisers who are paying to be on the site might get concerned because there'll be fewer eyeballs looking at their ads. So he's going to have to strike the right balance between the kind of content moderation he needs to keep his investors and customers happy and his free speech ideals.
All of this matters because Twitter's become the place where world leaders, opinion informers and politicians come to share their views. It's a kind of direct line between the decision makers and us, the people they represent. Elon Musk says we need a digital town square, a community space for public discussion, and Twitter, he argues, is it. Several top execs have already been sacked, and for those who remain, they need to know Musk means business.
I suspect they'll want to get some degree of certainty that Elon Musk isn't going to be running this like he runs his Twitter account. His Twitter account is full of memes and jokes. People want a degree of seriousness. They consider this a really important product in the world.
There's lots of speculation about whether Musk's takeover will mean the return of the most high-profile person on Twitter's banned list, former US President Donald Trump. He said on his own Truth social media platform that Twitter is now in sane hands, but he has no plans to return, for now. Zoe Kleinman, BBC News.
Let's speak now to our North America technology reporter, James Clayton, who joins us from outside Twitter's headquarters. And James, so many twists and turns to this story. What's the latest?
Well, Elon Musk is expected at Twitter later to speak to staff, but really there's sort of disbelief here in San Francisco because this has been such a topsy-turvy deal. First it was on, then it was off again. Elon Musk said that Twitter was full of bots, spam accounts, not real users. He even accused Twitter of fraud. He tried to pull out of the deal, and then miraculously 2 weeks ago, suddenly, he then wanted to buy the company again. So journalists like me don't necessarily take Elon Musk's word at face value. We've had lots of people come up to us and say, has Elon Musk really bought the company? Well, he has. He has bought the company. And what does that mean? Well, it means almost certainly a lot more free speech. It could also mean a lot more disinformation on the platform too. And of course, a possible invitation to the former US President Donald Trump to reactivate his account.
James, many thanks. James Clayton reporting. Here in a legal first, the sentencing of a murderer has been televised and broadcast live in England and Wales. An Old Bailey judge gave Gemma Mitchell life in prison with a minimum term of 34 years for killing her friend from church and then dumping her decapitated body in Devon. The judge described her as extremely devious. Helena Wilkinson reports.
This is Gemma Mitchell on her way to Mi Quen Chong's house. Hours later, she murders her and puts her body in the big blue suitcase. Miss Chong, also known as Deborah, was friends with the former osteopath. Both devout Christians, they met through the church, but they fell out over money. Today, history was made at the Old Bailey. Mitchell became the first murderer and the first woman to be sentenced on television in England and Wales.
You have shown absolutely no remorse, and it appears that you are in complete denial as to what you did, notwithstanding what, in my judgment, amounted to overwhelming evidence against you. The enormity of your crime is profoundly shocking.
Mitchell kept Miss Chong's body for 2 weeks. She then drove over 200 miles away to Salcombe in Devon. Charlotte Rollins was with family on holiday when they found the headless body.
You could see some fabric, and it was the body of a lady. And initially I thought maybe she slipped over, but then on closer look, her hand was left on her skirt, and it was so white, you knew that she wasn't alive.
Mitchell soon became the prime suspect and was arrested.
All right, Gemma, at this moment, I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder.
Today, in a victim impact statement read to court, Deborah Chong's sister, Amy Chong, said, "I can't begin to believe how we will begin to move on with our lives without Deborah in it. I hope justice is served. Gemma does not deserve my sympathy." Mitchell will spend at least 34 years in prison for what was a chilling and calculated murder of her friend. Helena Wilkinson, BBC News.
I'm joined now by our Home Affairs correspondent, Tom Simons. Such a distressing case, Tom, but also it made legal history.
It did, Rita. I mean, obviously anybody can go and watch a trial in person, go into court and sit down and watch what happens, but this really does bring it into people's front rooms and, of course, onto their phones. And the government did want, when it announced this, justice to be, and this is a quote, open and transparent, allowing people to see justice being delivered to the most serious of offenders. Well, that's what we saw today. Now, Scotland's had this for some time, but when it was announced for England and Wales, there were concerns that it might put off jurors and witnesses and victims of crime from taking part in trials, and also that it might become entertainment for TV programmes. Well, I think today's very strict regulations that say it's only the judge you see, it's only the sentencing stage of the trial that you see, that probably, I think, makes it perhaps not entertainment. And I don't think it's going to be the situation where we extend this kind of stuff and have sort of O.J. Simpson style trials like they have in America. But of course, attitudes can change.
Tom, many thanks. The United Nations has said that it's concerned at the way the authorities in Iran are treating people detained during weeks of protests in which at least 250 people are thought to have been killed. The UN said it had information that injured protesters were being moved from hospitals to detention centres. It also said the authorities have been refusing to release the bodies of people killed in the protests. COVID infections remain fairly stable across the UK, but other viruses such as flu and norovirus are increasing, according to the latest figures. Our medical editor Fergus Walsh explains more.
There are some encouraging signs that the current wave of COVID may be levelling off. The ONS estimates that 2 million people in the UK had the infection in the week to the 17th of October. That's unchanged from the previous week and represents around 1 in 30 people. But what matters is how many of those are getting seriously ill with COVID. The most up-to-date figures for hospital admissions are from England, and they show these are falling and are well below levels seen in previous Omicron waves. Plus, most patients in hospital with COVID will have been admitted with another condition. Now, that fall in COVID cases in hospitals is likely to be due in part to vaccinations. More than 10 million people have had their COVID booster, which increases immunity. In all, 26 million people are eligible. But there's also concern about flu. If we look at hospital admissions for flu in England, they were very low in the past 2 winters. The lines across the bottom there, because there was almost no flu circulating. This winter's flu season has started early and is already causing an impact. That small red line you can see there. Admission rates are highest among the under 5s. Now, in a bad winter like 2017, you can see that flu caused a big spike in admissions. So people are being urged to have their flu vaccine. 33 million are eligible. Now, every winter, of course, there are many viruses to contend with. As well as COVID and flu, there are increasing cases of RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, which can cause chest infections, especially in young children, and norovirus, which triggers vomiting and diarrhoea. All of these have the potential to put added pressure on the NHS. Meanwhile, in China, dozens of cities, including Wuhan, where coronavirus was first recorded, have gone back into lockdown as the country pursues its zero COVID policy. Rita.
Fergus, thank you. Fergus Walsh reporting. The time is 18 minutes past 6, our top story this evening. A snap election is called in Northern Ireland after months of political deadlock at Stormont, but no date is given. And still to come, queuing overnight to get accommodation. The university students desperate to find a room.
At 6:30, the family is protesting against plans to remove traffic calming measures from outside their East London school. And what's on your plate? We hear about our changing tastes from South London's fruit and veg traders.
Now, as winter approaches and worries about energy costs rise, 2 communities in the West Highlands of Scotland are having very different experiences of the cost of living crisis. In one, energy bills are well above the UK average, while in the other, a hydroelectric scheme has led to no increase at all. As part of our series looking at how energy costs are affecting different regions, our Scotland editor James Cook has visited Glenelg and Knoydart.
Winter is coming, and in the Highlands, they're worried. Energy bills here are way above the UK average and rising.
Life in rural Scotland does bring great rewards. Just look at the scenery for a start. But it also comes with great challenges, and many people here will tell you those challenges are now intensifying.
This community ferry hops to and fro between Glenelg on the mainland and the Isle of Skye. But the cost of diesel to run it has jumped 70% in the past year.
How difficult is that as a business?
Well, it is difficult because we always run on really quite tight margins here. and we're still expected as a social enterprise business to meet rising costs with very small profit margins. It does make me really nervous as to how we might be able to continue in the way that we are.
At the heart of Glenelg Village is the hall, but it's not cheap to maintain, especially when the electricity bill has soared from £800 a quarter to more than £4,000.
There's a church group, there's indoor bowls, indoor football, kids' youth club. They're going to have to look, can we run our club, can we not run our club? So if we increase our prices, there's no way that we can run the hall at the costs that are currently given.
All right, Rona.
In the Glenelg Inn, energy is not the only worry. Brexit and a lack of affordable housing have made staff hard to find, and inflation is pushing up the price of supplies.
I really love this business, but it is becoming much more challenging for me. I'm a bit scared about going into next year. I'm scared about the staffing issue, the prices, the power prices, obviously.
Sail south, though, and it's a brighter picture. This is the Knoydart Peninsula, accessible only by boat or a 2-day hike. That means it's not on the national grid. Power here comes from this hydro scheme, run by a community project called Knoydart Renewables.
If it wasn't for Knoydart Renewables, the population, which is about now 120 with all the businesses, which are paying all the taxes they're paying, wouldn't be sustainable economically. We'd probably have 20 or 30 people living here with tumbleweed blowing down the streets.
And you're effectively insulated from this energy emergency that everyone else is facing.
The energy emergency has no effect on us in terms of our electricity production.
In the local brewery, they see the hydro as a blessing.
We're not going to be receiving the same price hikes that grid-based consumers are.
So for you, how important is this hydro scheme to keep you going?
It's critical, really is. So we know we'll be able to keep the lights on and keep the beer coming.
And that sense of confidence is shared throughout this community.
There's more people here, there's more new businesses, there's triple the amount of kids in the school than there was when I was there, and there's room for development. So I'm building a house right now, and it means that I know that I will be able to have power, which is obviously very important.
Optimism, yes, but it's confined to this rare corner of the country without an energy crisis. James Cook, BBC News, Knoydart.
Within the last hour, it's been announced that the rock and roll legend Jerry Lee Lewis has died at the age of 87. Famous for his flamboyant showmanship, his songs included Whole Lotta Shaking Going On and Great Balls of Fire. He was considered one of the pioneers who made rock and roll America's dominant pop music of the 1950s. The musician Jerry Lee Lewis, who's died at the age of 87. Now, students could be forced to drop out of university if the shortage of housing in some cities isn't addressed. The National Union of Students has told the BBC. It says there's been a failure to plan for the bumper numbers getting places. In some places, students have queued through the night for flats for next year. Education editor Branwen Jeffries reports.
Waiting all night until morning. Students in Durham desperate for flats for next year. Student lets are limited in this historic city. Melody is a final year student in Manchester. Weeks into term and she's still sofa surfing.
I literally don't have a place to live right now. Currently I'm crashing with friends. It's probably like my only option because I'm just not able to find a place in Manchester at the moment.
What makes it so difficult to get a flat?
Because there's multiple people going for the same places. They said, can you pay 12 months now? And I was like, no, like I can't pay 12 months of rent now. Like I couldn't even ask that from my parents, if that makes sense.
There are record numbers of students. In several cities, not enough affordable housing.
Our advice service is flooded with kind of requests about housing, and providers for students are offering far fewer flats to rent this year compared to previous years, which is quite telling of the situation.
It's also about cost. Student maintenance loans have gone up a little bit this year, but nowhere near the cost of living. And for most students, their biggest bill is rent. This busy lettings agency now only has more expensive flats aimed at the young professional market.
Now there's not the availability. If they're for this year, if they're coming in for the next years, then yeah, we've got the properties on the market for them, but right now we've got nothing for students for this year.
The rising cost of living is students' biggest concern, and housing is part of that. Scotland may allow rents to be frozen. In England, the National Union of Students wants action.
The universities really need to take a look at their huge focus on increasing student intake. It's going up exponentially, and the fact is that there's just not enough accommodation provided for students.
It's not easy to find quick fixes for housing problems, which could leave some students struggling next year too. Bronwyn Jeffries, BBC News, Manchester.
Now, a new monarch brings many new changes, including the first 50p coins with King Charles III, which have been minted and will be circulated from December. Coins featuring the late Queen will remain legal tender. Howell Griffith reports.
Freshly minted and coming to a till near you. The new 50p is the first of the Carolean coins. For now, they're under tight security. You need special permission just to touch one. But from December, they'll circulate alongside the Queen's coins, which won't be withdrawn. Keeping the currency current is a significant moment. Martin was the man charged with creating the image and getting everything in proportion, knowing eventually his work would end up in millions of pockets and piggy banks.
You don't want to make it, for example, too cheerful, because this is a very serious symbol, and yet it needs to be light enough to put across his humanity. It's getting in the subtlest of possible ways those emotions, rather than, as it were, ears or nose or eyes.
These days, cash isn't really king. Only 15% of payments are used using coins and notes. But having a new monarch on the money still represents the biggest change here since decimalisation.
The buildings Her Majesty opened house the processes involved in the converting of blank discs into coin, decimal naturally, and in
the Queen and then Prince Charles saw for themselves how much it took to strike new sovereigns. All part of a process that goes back over a millennium.
We've actually been around as long as the royal family has, so we've struck for every monarch, including from Alfred the Great up to today. So something we've done a lot of times before, but something we haven't done for a very long time.
Eventually, every denomination will carry the King's image. They'll be introduced on demand to ensure the cash flow keeps coming. Howell Griffith, BBC News at the Royal Mint.
Let's catch up with the weekend weather. Here's Nick Miller. Nick.
Hi, Rita. We've all noticed how mild, shall we say, warm it is for the time of year. That's continuing for now. There are some changes as we look into next week, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Today, we'll have noticed a weather transformation out there. For many places, it started so wet. There was some flooding in Northern Ireland after the overnight rain. And then things transformed into what was a largely fine afternoon out there. Not quite as warm as yesterday, still 20 degrees today in Suffolk. Now, all eyes on the weekend, and there aren't any changes on the way. Just like the past few days, few weeks now, there will be rain at times, though not all the time, and it will stay mild, even very mild. For many of us, it will still feel quite warm out there for the time of year. We still have a flow of mild, warm air coming our way from the south. We still have low pressure to the west of the UK. It's around that we're spinning through these rain-bearing weather fronts, and there are more moving in tonight and into tomorrow. Right now, there are some heavy showers in Northern Ireland and Western Scotland. They'll head a little further east, and then later in the night, rain pushing into southern England, reaching Wales, the Midlands and into East Anglia by morning. It's a little cooler tonight. There are actually some places that will dip down into single figures as we start the day tomorrow, with rain in Wales and the Midlands, East Anglia, into northern England, then through Northern Ireland and spreading gradually north across Scotland into the afternoon, not reaching the far north until the evening, so the sunshine lasting longest here. Behind the rain for Northern Ireland, for Northern England, for Wales, the southwest, there'll be some further heavy showers in the hazy sunshine that breaks out through East Anglia and the southeast in the low 20s, 22 degrees. Tomorrow evening, the rain pushes further north across Scotland, a band of showers working east across England. Don't forget to put your clocks back on Saturday night. And then on Sunday, it will be a cloudier, cooler day in East Anglia and southeast England with some rain around. Elsewhere, sunny spells, umbrellas at the ready. There'll be showers, some heavy and possibly thundery on Sunday. And it'll be a windier day with coastal gales in the west. And temperatures are still way above where we might expect them to be at this time of year. But look at this. Same sort of weather next week, windy, wet at times, but as you look at the temperatures, notice how they start to come down, and so much closer to the average for early November by the end of next week. So again, just close to the average for the time of year, but compared with what we have now, that's going to feel very different. That's your forecast. Rita.
Nick, many thanks. And that is the BBC News at 6 on Friday, the 28th of October. You can keep up with all the latest developments on the BBC website. From the 6 o'clock team, it is goodbye, but the news continues on BBC One, as now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Bye-bye.